Yo, what's up, everybody? How's it going? I want to do a little podcast type thing about Artifact and why I think Artifact's kind of development and what has happened with the game and the general decisions involving the game and everything around the game have been absolutely fascinating to me, and I just kind of wanted to talk about it. So I have a whole list of things I want to go through, and we're just gonna jump straight into it. Now I'm gonna not. Sorry, I sadly didn't have the time to really like do any crazy editing. With the holidays, been fairly busy, and I do also have work, and I need to do that. So it's mostly just gonna be like some gameplay footage that I'll be playing over the course of this. But yeah, let's just get into it because there's a lot to talk about, and again, when I say I think it's fascinating, I don't mean that it's necessarily good. Like, there's been a lot of bad decisions that have been made over the course of Artifact's development. A lot of really bad decisions. But they're still really interesting to me. And I want to talk about it. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's talk about it. The first one is the title of this video. Artifact isn't a card game. And I know that may sound crazy, right? What am I talking about? Obviously, there's a card game. There are cards. You draw cards from a deck and you play them. It is obviously a card game. And yeah, there's definitely card game elements to the game. But I personally would actually describe Artifact as less of a card game and more of a turn-based strategy game with card game elements. Now, that sounds like I'm nitpicking, and I honestly kind of am, but bear with me. Hopefully, after I'm done here, you will see what I mean, why this distinction matters, and what kind of the problem is with it. Alright, cool. So, let's start somewhere else first, though. And that is the execution, strategy, spectrum, and competitive video games. This is what I have named it. So, what is the execution, strategy, spectrum? Well, in every competitive game you play, this is also true for non-competitive games, but we care about competitive games right now. But in every competitive game you play, there is an execution aspect, being the ability to input what you want to do, and then the strategy aspect, which is knowing what is the right thing to input. So it's something that is fairly easy to understand if we look at Counter-Strike, for example. In Counter-Strike, the strategy aspect is very pronounced if you're playing 5-on-5 at a high level, right? Very pronounced there because you have to okay, cool, you have to do callouts, you have to see, all right, they're coming in through A, so I'm going to position myself in this exact spot, the spot that gives me the exact field of view that I need and the exact advantage that I need to be able to fight them back if they come through A, right? And you have to make that call, and then your allies tell you, oh wait, shit, they aren't coming through A, they're coming through B. So now you're adjusting yourself and getting yourself into a new position that again has been strategically chosen. So this is strategy, right? While the execution aspect of a game like Counter-Strike is fairly straightforward. It is shooting the guy, right? There's no point to having the best strategy in the world if you then can't shoot the guy and hit them and kill them. You need to be able to execute on your strategy. So this varies from game to game. There are some games where honestly your execution is so much more important than your strategy that somebody with brilliant execution can beat somebody up with brilliant strategy but worse execution. Right? So I think actually Counter-Strike to a certain level is an example like that, where I personally am not very good at it, but somebody that is very good at it can probably just go into any random game that I personally would queue into, right, on my skill level, and just ruffle stomp 1 versus 5 because they are just so much better at execution. And even if my team, like if I had 5 players that all were doing perfect callouts, it wouldn't matter because we couldn't hit the guy quickly enough, right? There are other games like this. So, for example, StarCraft is a great example of a game that has a really interesting strategy execution situation where you want to have a good strategy, right? I mean, it is a real-time strategy game, right? You want to have good strategy, because you need to be able to see what your opponent is doing. You want to scout them out. You want to have a build order, right? You want to make sure you're managing your resources properly. And, you have a goal as you're going through the game. But the thing is that none of that matters if you're not able to actually input the buttons quickly enough. There's a reason why StarCraft is always quoted as having, I always use as the example for a game that has 300 APM, right? You got to do 300 inputs a minute, because that much execution is needed to be able to keep up with the strategic aspect of the game. So again, somebody that is not very strategic at StarCraft can probably, as long as they're able to input Zerg Rush quickly enough, win crazy amounts of game and get to a relatively high rank before they hit a wall where people also have that execution. So there's a lot of games like this, right? Like in fighting games, it's often talked about that you need to be able to have full control over your character. You need to be able to use all of the special moves. You need to be able to do all of these things before you even get to the strategy level, right? It is often said that in fighting games at the very top level, it's all strategy. It is all strategy. Inputs hardly matter, because everybody's so good at the inputs that now everybody's on an even playing field, and the only main difference here is actually strategy. Now, of course, there are some games where that isn't necessarily true. Like, for example, Super Smash Bros. Melee is a fighting game where inputs are so difficult that even at the top level, players make mistakes. So a player like Leffen, who's known for being just absolutely brilliant and flawless with his inputs, is still playing at an advantage, even though he may not be playing the most strategically. Although I don't mean to shit talk Leffen right now. He's very good and he also is very strategic. But you get the point, right? Dota 2 is a game that's like kind of a little bit more on the opposite spectrum, I would say, where strategy is more important than execution. Like, you can get to the top execution level pretty quickly in Dota 2, right? There isn't that much you have to be able to do all that quickly or all that precisely. And then it comes down to strategy. And that even involves stuff like laning, right? Like, honestly, somebody that lanes at 6k MMR and somebody that lanes at the International, they're probably on the same level in terms of execution. They're just not on the same level in terms of strategy, right? Like, the international level player might actually go in there and use glyph properly and be better at pulling the creeps, at knowing when to pull the creeps, be better at manipulating the AI. But all of those things are actually part of strategy, not so much execution. All right, cool. So this is something that is really, really important. But turn-based games, like, for example, card games, often have practically no execution aspect, and they are all strategy, right? So they are just, they're all strategy, 100% strategy, because there's no execution. If I'm playing Hearthstone, unless I'm playing some really weird situation where I have Tipsy-Turvy Priest, right? I have APM Priest, and I need to get through 7 layers of taunts. In most situations, APM and execution doesn't really matter. It is all about strategy. So this leads to a situation where you want to have inconsistency in games. Now, this may sound a little bit weird, but inconsistency in games is actually generally very, very, very important. If a game is too consistent, then you end up in a situation where every match plays out exactly the same way that the previous one did. And so in games that have an execution level, you can actually not implement inconsistency because you don't have to, because the players are the inconsistent component. Since the execution required to be able to play at a high level is very difficult, and unless you're at the very top of the game, and even there, players still make mistakes. For example, in Counter-Strike, StarCraft, Dota 2, like Dota 2, yeah, even Dota, right? But like fighting games, like all of those levels, people still make mistakes, right? They still screw up, and that creates inconsistency in an otherwise consistent system. But games that do not have a sort of, an execution element, they need to create inconsistency somewhere else. Because let's say we want to create an entirely consistent game, right? Entirely consistent game. So let's take Hearthstone and make it so that every turn Like, you can predetermine what cards you draw every turn. So on turn 1, I draw always this card. In turn 2, I always draw this card, and so on, and always goes through. Then the game is actually decided in before the match even started, and it essentially just turns into rock, paper, scissors. Right? Then the inconsistency in the game is no longer existent because it is now entirely consistent, which means that since the game is entirely consistent, we know exactly how it's going to play out every single time, meaning that as soon as I do my turn 1 play and my opponent does their turn 1 play, we both know exactly what decks we are playing, and now we also know exactly how this game is going to play out, and we don't have to play it at all. So card games introduce inconsistency through randomness. So Magic the Gathering, of course, has drawing cards, but drawing cards in Magic the Gathering is actually incredibly random, much more random than a game like Hearthstone or Artifact, because in Magic you can also draw lands, and when you draw a land, sometimes that just can like really screw you, or you don't draw a land, and now you have to deal with the fact that you don't have lands, right? So that introduces even more inconsistency into the aspect of drawing, which makes every match play out more differently. Card games specifically have just general card drawing as a matter of inconsistency, right? You don't know how many cards, like what cards you're going to get every time you play. You're trying to build your decks for consistency. This is a very important thing in deck building, but you can't guarantee that you're getting what you want, right? So then very aggressive decks in Hearthstone, for example, there was a period of time where Zoo decks would play upwards of like 12 1-drops, right? 12 cards they can play on turn 1. They didn't do that because they were planning to play 12 cards on turn 1, but they really wanted to play a card on turn 1, because if you don't play a card on turn 1, you're kind of in a really bad spot. So you needed to create that consistency, and you did that by trying to kind of like overpower the inherent inconsistency in the game. Cool. So I hope that makes sense. I hope I explained that properly. So Magic has lands, right? And Hearthstone took a different approach. They just added a lot of randomness into the game, right? They added stuff like Knife Juggler, where it just shoots a random enemy every time you play a minion, right? So like you don't know who exactly it's gonna hit. You have cards like Burgle, where it gives you random cards from your opponent's class, right? Or just simpler randomness like Animal Companion, where it gives you, like, you play it and gives you 1 of 3 random minions and you don't know which one it is. So every time you play Animal Companion, you now need to adjust to what the situation is, which creates inconsistency in the play, which makes the game more interesting. Right now, I understand that this randomness can be very frustrating, and I gotta say, I personally believe that Hearthstone is, at times, it has taken it a little bit far with cards like Yogg-Saron, although to their credit, honestly, they didn't think Yogg-Saron was going to be good. And I think it's totally fair to make a mistake like that. Most people didn't think Yogg-Saron was going to be good when it was first announced. But anyway. So, Hearthstone does it by having randomness on cards, right? Now, here is a little bit of a problem. In Artifact, you have a strong consistency inbuilt into the game. So there's no execution element, and there is strong consistency with the heroes, because you can select which 3 heroes will spawn first, then you know which heroes coming next and heroes coming afterwards. And the thing about heroes is they will always come back, and they are like this constant game piece in the match. You know that they will always be there. So because they have the strong consistency in the game, you have created a situation where now oftentimes it may feel like every match plays out very, very, very similarly. And I imagine that in the early stages of their development, they actually had things like you could select which position a hero would go into and which position a creep would go into. And you could select attack patterns, right? I imagine that at a point in development, those elements were there, but they ended up removing them, because what ended up happening is that while it made the game very consistent, and I imagine it was fairly competitive as well, it ended up resulting in a situation like I described before, where actually most of the game is decided by the time you queue into your opponent. not so much by the decisions made in the game, because the game became so consistent that even though you were drawing cards, the main game pieces in the match, being the heroes, are still so predictable that the act of drawing cards wasn't as important. So Artifact has the situation where there is a lot of consistency if you don't have all of this randomness. And I imagine that consistency was so prevalent that it didn't actually make the game any fun. Like it made the game feel really similar every single time you played it. And this is even a complaint people have right now. So a deck I personally play a lot, all right, and it's like really the main deck I play is just a blue-green combo deck. Right? And in my blue-green combo deck, I start with Ogre Magi, Tyrion Protector, and Kana. And my second hero, like my first hero to spawn afterwards, is Drow Ranger. Now, the thing about this is that in this lineup, in almost every single game I play, that Drow Ranger goes into the lane of Kana. I already know that because, well, the lane of Kana is going to have the 2 creeps spawn, and Kana also is probably going to survive the initial, well, she almost always survives the initial turn. And that way, my Drow Ranger is very likely to be protected, right? So that's a very consistent play. And it makes it so that I just, I don't really think much about it. I just put it where it goes. And that kind of like autopilot play, because you already know exactly how everything is going to play out, would have been much, much worse if Artifact didn't have all of this randomness that they introduced to, I imagine, combat the consistency. So that's what the approach they took, right? They added a lot of randomness, and they added randomness into every aspect of the game. So they have no mulligan, which is really weird. It's something I haven't seen a lot of people talk about, but Artifact doesn't have a mulligan, right? Which, it's just very odd. Again, it's something that is not brought up very often, but every other card game has at least a form of mulligan, right? Personally, I really like the Hearthstone mulligan. That's great, but even Magic's mulligan at least gives you a little bit control over your starting hand. You know, sometimes you just draw only very high cost cards and you don't have anything to play for the first few turns, and that just feels really bad. But Artifact doesn't even give you the option to do anything about it, right? On top of that, Artifact has stuff like the random pathing, right? The random attack patterns, the hero placement that you can control, the secret shop, which every aspect of the secret shop is random, right? First of all, or like, not even just the secret shop, but the shop in general, every aspect of that is random. Like, you have 9 items, but they are randomly ordered, so you don't know which ones are going to show up first. And sometimes you need one, but not the other, right? There is the secret shop, which is entirely random and has lost me tournament games before, which were very frustrating. And then, of course, like the consumables, which, even though that's a small pool of randomness, is still a pool of randomness. Then you have random cards like Ogre Magi, right? Ogre Magi is game-winning randomness. He's super powerful. And then even before that, we had things like Cheating Death. Now, Cheating Death got removed, which is, thank God it got removed. But still, it is a relic. It is something that really shows this problem they had where every game felt exactly the same, right? So it's just weird, right? Now, the thing is that in of itself really only is a problem if the game you're trying to make is a card game. Because in card games, and with the card game audience, you don't want to have incredibly consistent games. They don't like that, right? To them, that's not really what they are going for. And I am the main demographic for that. I love card games. I made my own, right? Like, I made a card game. Like, it's currently printing. No, I love card games. Although it's not actually currently printing. It's printing in January. But anyway, card games are awesome, right? They're really fun, really satisfying to play. But a big aspect of card games is exactly that inconsistency from drawing cards, and you have, your cards be your main game pieces. Now, Artifact doesn't have both those elements. In Artifact, you have super consistent play across the board in the early stages, especially because your main game pieces aren't your card, they are your heroes, and the heroes aren't consumed, the heroes always come back, as opposed to cards in a card game, which the cards are usually consumed, and then they just disappear. So every card you play, you lose a game piece. While in Artifact, the cards that you lose and the game pieces you lose by playing the cards, they are usually not that important, right? The cards themselves don't matter as much. The only thing the cards matter for is interacting with the main game pieces. And a lot of cards in the game are actually about interacting with the heroes, right? They're about killing heroes, buffing heroes, in some cases even creating new heroes, right? I mean, I guess in one case. So what this leads to is a game that doesn't feel that much like a card game. Instead, it feels a lot more like a turn-based strategy, as I said in the beginning. And to me, it feels like, here's what I think happened, right? Richard Garfield talked to Valve and was like, I have an idea for a card game. And Valve was like, cool, hook us up. And then through the entire development process, they were like, card game, card game, card game. We are making a card game. It's the Dota card game. And they kept developing. Then they start advertising it. And they sponsor card game streamers. They get, they get people to talk about how awesome of a card game it is. How fun of a card game it is. And you can see the word card game just be thrown around everywhere. And so naturally, the type of players that attracts are card game players. But now that the card game players are here, they open up the game and then they see what is really more chess-like than it is Magic or Hearthstone. And that's weird. Now, if instead they had just at one point during the development said, guys, are we actually making a card game? And they were like, oh, I don't know, are we? Right? And they could have actually taken a different approach to it. But now I'm just speculating and just kind of talking about weird things. But anyway, so it's odd. It is odd. Right? Now, I hope this helped you get a little bit of an understanding why there is so much randomness in the game. The randomness in the game makes sense, right? That's the thing that I'm hoping I'm bringing across here, is that the randomness in Artifact, all of this randomness that people constantly complain about, it exists for a reason. It exists to make the game feel more like a card game, because it isn't a card game. And that's not really one of the only problems with the game. I gotta say, and God, I've been holding back on saying this. God, I'm gonna regret saying this. Artifact is not a very well designed game. It has some great ideas. But many aspects in it seem rushed and lazy. Right? Cheating Death, the original implementation, which again, it was changed now, but still, Cheating Death, we know, was in the game like this for a year. And Cheating Death, to me, is actually a very necessary card. The card as it had existed, I personally thought was actually required for the game to function. It was just the laziest and most obvious implementation. To me, it just kind of seems like what happened was somebody's like, here is a card. And then somebody else at the team was like, cool. And that's all the thought process that ever went into it. Right? Then you have the lock mechanic, which is essentially Artifact's discard. Now, discarding is the worst thing. Why does discarding exist? Discarding in Magic isn't any fun. Discarding your opponent's hand, that's just the most cancer thing. And locking cards in your opponent's hand is just one step away from discarding, which is of course an improvement. But to me, that still seems like there was this weird sense. Okay, so we don't do we do discard? And you're like, discard kind of sucks. So what do we do instead? What if we just lock them in hand? And you're like, awesome, in the game it goes. And then it went in. Right, a lot of things really seem like they are the first idea, the first implementation they came up with. So, okay, a lot of artifacts design, is centered around fixing problems caused by its underlying ideas, right? So, for example, in Artifact, heroes are locked into a lane, which means that since you can't freely move heroes out of a lane, now all of a sudden cards like Blink Dagger and anything that allows you to move a hero from lane A to lane B are incredibly powerful. They're like super, 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 super strong, right? So, there would be ways to fix this, right? You could have, for example, TPs be always part of the shop. Because and then make it so that a TP doesn't fully heal your hero, which is kind of similar to Dota, right? Like when you TP in Dota, you don't TP back to Fountain. Usually, you TP from a lane to another lane. So all of the damage you've taken in a lane, you will also take in a different lane. Or you could even just make a TP that, like select a hero, teleport them to another lane. It would be closer to the implementation of what it is in Dota, and it would also like make it so that required, like, because you do need movement tools, right? You do need them, which makes it so that like Blink Dagger isn't as crazy strong and isn't as insane. But again, I feel like they just took the first, okay, cool, Blink Dagger lets you move lanes, awesome, cool, add it in. Not do TPs, I guess they get you back to Fountain. Yeah, cool, add it in, right? Right. On top of that, like, so a lot of design, again, it's centered around fixing the problems caused by its design. So attack patterns are random, which was added into the game to make the game feel more like a card game. So now there are a lot of cards that allow you to change attack patterns, which makes you think that since now a lot of cards allow you to manipulate attack patterns and deal with attack patterns, to kind of like remove that aspect. It seems like that aspect was added in just for then to be added, for them to then add cards that remove that aspect. Which again, to me, I think that just goes back to them saying we want to make a card game, and I mean like, okay, cool. How do we make this feel more like a card game? Another element is that armor is overpowered. Now, this may sound crazy because I know nobody buys armor items, but that's exactly the thing. Armor is overpowered, right? So they were like, shit, well, armor's wrecking everything. Let's just implement a damage type called piercing damage, and then they just gave everything piercing damage, so now armor is completely useless, right? Like, that's why nobody puts any armor items into their decks, because health is just better, because health deals better with piercing damage, and everything does piercing damage. So that's just kind of weird, right? And there's more weird design in this game that I just find very odd. So, for example, like blue is always dying, which feels bad. Now, I don't mean to say that that doesn't feel that it is overpowered or anything like that. I'm just talking about game feel here, right? But it just feels bad. Like, you first turn, you play your mono blue deck, and like you can expect two of your heroes to just drop dead. And the thing is that isn't actually really how control usually works in card games, right? In control, so let's say blue is obviously very similar to control, right? Like blue, when you play blue, it feels very control-y. But traditionally in card games, control is very responsive. Your opponent plays something and then you react to what they have played. And generally speaking, you avoid putting too many pieces on the board because you know you're just going to have them overwhelmed early until you get to your removal. But in Artifact, there are automatic pieces on the board. They're always there. So since you have your pieces, they just constantly get blown up, which makes sense in the context of the game, but it still feels really, really bad, right? Like, I personally, whenever I play a blue deck, I see my heroes dying in the first turn, and I know I'll be fine. I know this is how it's supposed to go. I know that I can come back from this, but that doesn't stop me from just kind of going like, god damn it. You get what I mean? And that's not fun. It's just not considering the player in your game design, which isn't really how you should design games. And in the end, just other weird things, like, for example, letting boards and hands be infinite, which seems like they are sacrificing playability because it just makes the game feel really clunky, right? Like, with boards, is less of a big deal because usually when a board goes really wide, the game is over anyway. But you have your hand with 1,000,000 cards and you like scroll through them and you can't even see all of them. It makes it feel really, really clunky and just difficult to understand exactly what you can do. For what purpose? Like, I understand that it's cool to have unlimited hand sizes, but there's a reason why other games don't have that. Like, it seems to me like they only added that in to be able to say, you see how Hearthstone limits your hand? We don't do that. And that's just kind of dumb, in my opinion, right? Like, to me, that's just kind of like my hand in Hearthstone, my hand in Magic, right? Or in any physical card game for that reason, just feels a lot better because I have a good overview of all the cards. While in Artifact, I have 1,000,000 cards in my hand, which now you might be like, well, but Balmy, like you put a bunch of cheap items into your item deck, you buy 1,000,000 items, you're gonna have a clumped up hand. And I'm just saying, yes, but that's, again, another problem that is caused by their design, right? Like, it's not like something that inherently exists in all card games. Like, they added a shop, they made all of the items really cheap. They made it so that you can just buy the entire shop and fill your entire hand up with cards that way. They could have not done that. There's actually something that maybe would make it so that, like, black and red snowballs a little less hard by making a limited hand size. It also keeps blue in check, funnily enough. You know what? This might actually be a really good balance decision. Right? You make it so you can only have 10 cards in hand. So if you buy too many things in the shop, then you just have a full hand now. Or if you draw too many cards, you stack up too much shit in your hand, you just have a full hand now. And you want to play cheaper things to actually be able to, clear that out a little bit. Again, this is just how I kind of feel about it, and it just seems like, again, they added in these features just for the sake of being able to say, go fuck yourself, Hearthstone. Which I'm always in favor of somebody saying, go fuck yourself, Hearthstone, because go fuck yourself, Hearthstone. Actually, I kind of like Hearthstone still. But you get what I mean, right? So it's just, I don't know. Something I've heard a lot is that Constructed is stale. Right? And something I see people quote a lot in regards to that is that certain heroes are just better than other heroes. While this is true, and there's a reason why we see Kana everywhere, but Prelix nowhere, I personally don't actually think that is the main problem here. The bigger problem is the lack of win conditions and the lack of variety in the win conditions. So if we think about the win conditions that are currently in the game, there's Time of Triumph and Emissary of the Quorum. There's Bolt of Damocles. There is a kind of just black pushing your tower, right? Like, so I guess the Oath and just Generator, just like black pushing tower. Actually, in that regard, I think black is probably one of the more well-designed colors. But anyway, right? But like the general win conditions, you have Time of Triumph, you have Emissary, you have Incarnation, although they usually play together. You have Bolt of Damocles, and just generally black fuckery. But overall, there's not that much there, right? Like, there isn't that much in terms of winning the game that you can do other than those specific cards. Now, there are some Artifact actually pulls a lot from pretty general European board game design, as in it has this like ever marching push that pushes you towards the end of the game automatically. So an Artifact, if you do nothing for you guys just pass back and forth forever, then it's not a stalemate, but somebody will eventually win, right? So it's like the game is a little bit interesting like that, but that's actually like an element that is very frequent in European board games. But anyway, because of that element, right, you don't need crazy win conditions like Time of Triumph, but you do still need a win condition because it is still like a strategic, and it is a card game, right? Like, even though I said it isn't a card game, they have pushed it so much to force it into being a card game. So it is still a card game, and you draw all of your, you draw all of your tools, and then you have your elements to like try and win the game with. But there aren't enough elements to try and win the game with, which is why the only viable options are, those that I just mentioned and those specific decks. You have your red black push, and then you have your green blue combo, and you have your green red ramp, and you have your mono blue. So what else is there? You got black red hero killer, but honestly that isn't very popular or very good anymore. There are items, of course, but items are just really inconsistent, right? Like, especially since the only item win conditions that are any good are so stupidly expensive that the only way you can really make them work is through payday. So that to me is like the actual root cause of why Constructed feels so stale. It's a lack of win conditions, right? Because there are some win conditions in the game, and the win conditions that do exist are so powerful. They are so powerful that nothing else can really keep up. And if instead those incredibly powerful win conditions were a little bit weaker, right? Like, here's the thing. Here's how I think about balance. Like, I always think the perfect balance of anything is when you've nerfed it enough that people still play it. And I know that sounds a little bit weird, but like, I'm always assuming something is overpowered. And I'm fine with that, because then my approach after something is overpowered is I take it down step by step by step by step until people are just about to stop playing it, but then they don't. And then I leave it at that, right? Because there is always a breakpoint. So, for example, with Time of Triumph, would you all still play Time of Triumph if instead of saying +4, it said +3 on all of the stats? Probably, right? It would probably still be fine. But by nerfing Time of Triumph, you create a situation where now other cards are equally useful. So like Incarnation of Salamine. Incarnation of Salamine is just a card that shouldn't exist, because its inherent effect of providing you with infinite mana is just something that will overwhelm everything forever. There will never be something that can keep up with Incarnations of Salamine's effect. So the only cards that can combat it are cards that provide something else or are provided at a cheaper cost. So now we are already trying to power creep something like that. Oh, I am getting a call. It's okay. She'll be fine. But yeah, right? It's just a weird thing. And what they need is they don't need to balance the heroes. They need to balance the win conditions. Because if there isn't a reason, if there isn't a win condition that synergizes with Prelix, then it doesn't matter what stats the hero has, because there is a win condition that synergizes with Bristleback and Axe, and I'm just going to play that instead, right? There need to be more cards like Arm the Rebellion. Like, if Arm the Rebellion just provided you with +2 health. Is it +2 health? No, I think it gives +2 attack and +1 armor, right? Like, let's say it added like +2 attack and +2 health instead. That card would be really, really good. But as is, it just doesn't really keep up. And then, of course, you have cards like Annihilation, which is just super overwhelming, like especially for 6 mana. Now, I do want to say something positive at this point, and then is that Artifact is still in its base set. Now, I don't know how many of you played Hearthstone back during beta, but I did. I actually played Hearthstone during the beta, and back then, the best cards in the game were very limited. And it was actually at a stage where people were saying you can take these 20 neutral cards and put them into any class and then just randomize the rest of the deck and you'll have a good deck. And they were right. Because these 20 neutral cards were all just very value-orientated neutrals, which had cards like Harvest Golem and Argent Commander, right? And that's how you won games, just by having those simple cards. Now, those cards, the big 20, right? A lot of them, like a few of them got nerfed. Argent Commander actually ended up getting nerfed, right? And nobody plays them anymore. Now, even after the nerfs initially in Hearthstone, we're still seeing play back then, but today nobody plays them anymore, and they're no longer considered to be any good. I can't remember the last time I saw somebody play Harvest Golem. The thing is that simplistic nature of the game rotated out once more cards rotated in. With the release of expansions and with the release of additional things that you can win the game with other than just pure value, you greatly increase the variety. So, in the case of Artifact, a lot of the current game-winning cards are actually just pure value cards. They just value your opponent out of the game, right? Or they are just pure stats, and they just stat your opponent out of the game. They aren't so much synergistic. Time of Triumph doesn't synergize with anything other than having bodies. Bolt of Damocles doesn't synergize with anything other than just having your opponent have a tower at 20 HP. Once we see an expansion come around, once we see an expansion add more cards into the game, I believe this will get better. And this constructed a stale problem will get fixed. Now, I'm going to go ahead and actually make a call right here. I believe they're already working on not just the next expansion, but the expansion afterwards. So, confession, I'm personally actually not a big Richard Garfield fan. But the guy knows how to make, how to handle card game development. Right? He's just been doing it for so long. It would be very weird if he didn't know it by now. And something that card game developers do is that they develop expansions ahead of time. Now, think about it. We know that the Call to Arms set in Artifact right now has been in the game like this for a very long time. Right? For near a year. We know that from the closed beta. So, why? Why haven't there been any changes made? Why are all the changes that have been made so minor? Why is the recent patch with 5 cards being changed one of the biggest patches the game has ever seen? Well, there are 2 possibilities really. The first one is that the Artifact team is lazy and does nothing. Yeah, I mean, I guess that could be it. I find that unlikely, right? Valve hires very selectively. They don't just hire anyone. They hire only very specific people and only exactly who they want. So the other option, of course, is that they have moved on to an entirely different project, or they are developing the next part of the game, aka the next expansion. So in an ideal world, in my opinion, what they need to do, because they have already announced their $1 million tournament, and unless they're backing out of that, which honestly I don't believe they will, because that would just be really bad PR, probably worth, honestly, the bad PR they would get from backing off the $1 million tournament would probably be more damaging than just hosting the $1 million tournament. So, I think what they should do is they should take the $1 million tournament and schedule it to be a month after the release of the next expansion, or maybe even just 2 weeks after it. And that way, with the new expansion, you have so many different decks. You have so many exciting things. And there will be a huge PR push and will allow them to actually do things. And honestly, I would be surprised if the next expansion isn't already mostly finished designing and is currently in playtesting. That's where I imagine it is. This is just me theorizing, but I would be surprised if this isn't true. That's of course good for us, right? That would be cool. That would be awesome. Because here's the thing, even though I've complained a lot about it, I do actually still like this game. Now, I have a few things I want to talk about before we finish up this video. But yeah, I'm almost done. So, the first thing is on monetization. I don't know why the fuck they're doing what they're doing. I don't understand it. This is just me complaining now, right? But I hate how people have been just fucking developing games and just trying to milk every tiny bit of money out of people that they can. I understand that you want to make money, but god fucking damn it, capitalism should have an end at one point, right? Viva la revolution. Anyway, just joking. Just in case somebody gets upset here, I'm sure there's gonna be somebody who gets upset. Anyway, so I just think that why does this game have an initial purchase and then you have to buy packs? Why does this game not just fucking give you the cards. Like, I get it. I get that you want people to spend money on packs. Then do that, but make the game free to play. Like, fuck, what happened to me buying a game and being able to play it? What happened to that? Like, why is that not a thing anymore? Like, I'm totally fine with microtransactions in free-to-play games because, like, fuck, they're free-to-play, you gotta make money. Right? Like, and I don't mind buying packs in free-to-play card games. Fuck, you wanna make... Go ahead. Right? But what happened to me buying a game and getting the goddamn game? Like, what happened to that? God, this is just me being frustrated with it, right? And, like, on top of that, like, an artifact, you have to spend additional money to buy packs, right? Like, you have to. There's no way to avoid it because there's no in-game currency, right? And the lack of an in-game currency is actually a huge problem because then it also leads to a whole, like, priced play dilemma. Where in priced play, you gotta get free wins before you get anything back. Right? Like, there's something that Magic does a lot better. Magic the Gathering Arena, there is essentially the same system, the same gauntlet system, right? That's where they got it from. And I don't know, actually. Maybe they didn't. Sorry. Maybe. But they are going, but they have the same gauntlet system. But, like, I go into a gauntlet and I go 2 and 3, right? So, like, because you can lose 3 times, you can win up to 7 times. So 2 and 3 is really bad, right? It would be like 1 and 2 in Artifact. Or like 0 and 2. But at least I get a little bit of something. Like, I get some gold. I get some shitty cards thrown at me. Right? And because it's more incremental, I'm now able to work my way up to the next ticket and then play again. Now you might say, oh, but how are they going to make money? They already made money. Like, you can bring that argument if it's a free-to-play game. You can't bring that argument if the game is $20. Right? Like, and if you are like, okay, cool, but, like, the expansion is worth more than $20, then sell it for more. Sell it for 50. Like, seriously, just sell the game for $50. Give me the fucking expansion. Like, what's so hard about that? I don't know. It's just me being frustrated. And here's the next thing I'm frustrated with. What happened to MMR-based matchmaking? Like, how come the only game that has a proper MMR-based matchmaking system is fucking Pokemon Showdown? What happened to that? Right? Like, I love Pokemon Showdown because I can go on there and grind MMR. But, like, the only other game where I can do that these days is what's it called? Like Dota, but I don't like doing it in Dota because it's team-based. And, like, everybody always gets upset at each other. I want to do it one-on-one. Right? It's just annoying. It's just annoying. Right? And I don't understand why they wouldn't do that. Because, like, they advertised Artifact. I'm sure I'm not the only one that understood a lot of the advertising this way. As this, like, mega competitive, oh my god, you're gonna have to be so good to play this game. And then you can show everybody how good you are. But then you don't give me a ladder where I can just grind MMR. Like, on top of that, the game isn't a great streaming game. But it's not that bad. I don't actually think it's that bad of a streaming game. Because, like, people just need to understand that. The problem that it has as a streaming game isn't the game itself. It's the lack of a story. Like, the reason why games are popular while being streamed, like Fortnite and PUBG are a great example for this, is because they tell a story when you go into the game. Every match you play is a story to tell. Now, in Hearthstone, they do that by having the legend ranking, right? And on legend, the story of the streamer, the story that the stream is telling you is it's taking you on a journey through that ranking, through the ladder. While on Artifact, there is no fucking story to tell. What is the story? That I went 5-1 in a gauntlet? Who gives a shit about the gauntlets? They don't mean anything. Right? But if my story was, oh shit, I'm number 2 in the world fighting for number 1, that's a good story that gets people invested. Like, I actually find it unbelievable that somebody managed to make a worse ranking system or a worse, like, general, like, ladder gameplay system than fucking Hearthstone, which is terrible. God. Okay, now I'm just rambling. Anyway, so that's pretty much it. That's all my thoughts, though, so... I hope that was interesting. It's gonna be an hour and a half long, isn't it? Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys tomorrow. I'll never be invited to anything made by Valve. That's okay. I never thought I would anyway. I still like this game. I just wish it was better.